Number 13, we're coming to the end of this curricular list, is a habit of caution in reasoning to conclusions. Should Iraq be invaded by the most technologically sophisticated military in the history of the planet, and should hundreds of billions of dollars be allotted to that purpose? Well, maybe it should and maybe it shouldn't. But listening to a few government propaganda hours about the similarities between the leader of Iraq and Adolf Hitler is not the way to come to the conclusion, even though it's the way that 80 or 90% of us do. And finally, is the constant development and testing of judgment. You make judgments, you discriminate value, and then you follow up. You keep an eye on your predictions to see how far skewed from what actually occurs, and or how consistent with what transpires things are. Now, this might not be the totality of a great curriculum, but let me tell you from where I sit there, this is well worth considering long and hard as a diet for your own school practice. One of the great anomalies of the teaching business is the disconnect in awareness, or the awareness disconnect between academic endeavor and the world of work, the job market. It's sort of implied that if you acquire a good academic record, that the world will take care of you later on, which I think is a very questionable assertion. Nevertheless, even if it were not a questionable assertion, I think you'll find what I'm going to say next interesting. I wrote to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I had read that they do projections about what jobs will be commonest in the economy of a decade ahead. And I asked for the latest one of those. I said, well, what will be the most abundant jobs in the United States? And the list I got back will I think, surprise you quite as much as it surprised me. The single commonest occupation in the United States will be retail salesperson, a clerk in a store. Now, quick, go over the 12 years of schooling that you probably had. Maybe add to it the 4 or 6 years of college you tacked on top of that, and tell me exactly what part of that experience is relevant to being a retail salesperson. Was your trigonometry or geometry or calculus, is that relevant? How about your memorizing the periodic table of elements? Is that Mendeleev, David? Okay, the number 2 job in the United States will be registered nurse, which is kind of interesting. I've always felt in my own life that the nurse was far more important a part of the medical team than the doctors I encountered, present company accepted there. But once again, if you try to find a fit between the diet, the scholastic diet, and what's required of a nurse, there's a bit of a disconnect. The third most important job in the United States would be cashier. I don't need to comment on that. Number 4 is general office clerk, which speaks for itself. Number 5 is a job that's always intrigued me. I wish I had gone for it. It's truck driver. But once again, it's hard for me to see what the 12 years invested and the enormous amount of money represented by that 12 years. In New York State, it's about $11,000 a kid. I believe it's higher than that in California, but it's certainly the equivalent, times 12. If we took that sum and invested it in kindergarten in the kid's name in some canny investments, maybe real estate, which has been a great investment, I think maybe when after 12 years it could be spent fishing or panning for gold, we could hand the kid $1 million or so and say, now go get yourself an education somewhere. There's a gigantic part of the gross national product invested in this form of training. There has to be some reasonable theory of applicability to the functions that the national economy requires. The 6th most common job in the United States will be managers. The 7th, janitors, cleaners, and domestic servants. The 8th, nurses' aides, orderlies, and general attendants, ward attendants. The 9th, food counter and related workers. Notice we're not talking about chefs. We're talking about food counter workers. And 10th is the honorable profession that acting could not survive without: wait persons. I would prefer to say waiters and waitresses.